The whistle of the locomotive pierced the late afternoon air, a haunting sound that would forever be etched in Harriet Hamilton's memory as the moment before everything changed. Clutching her leather-bound journal to her chest, she stared out the window of the passenger car at the passing Utah landscape, red rock formations standing like silent sentinels against the October sky of 1885. Harriet had spent the last 3 years in Boston attending university, a rarity for women of her time, but her father had insisted his only daughter receive an education befitting her sharp mind. Now, at 23, she was returning to St. George, Utah, where her family had established a modest but respected mercantile business. The train rocked gently beneath her, and she closed her eyes, imagining the warm embrace of her parents waiting at the station. A sudden jolt snapped her eyes open. The train lurched violently, and passengers cried out in alarm. Harriet gripped the edge of her seat as the car tilted precariously. Something was terribly wrong. The screeching of metal against metal filled her ears as the world around her became a spinning blur. Her body was thrown forward, then sideways as the passenger car broke free from its couplings. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Screams pierced the air, then darkness. When Harriet's consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Pain radiated through her left leg and side. Something heavy pinned her down. The taste of copper filled her mouth, and the acrid smell of smoke burned her nostrils. Disoriented, she tried to move but found herself trapped beneath what appeared to be part of the train's seating that had broken loose during the derailment. "Help," she called out weakly, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. "Is anyone there?" The wreckage groaned around her. She could hear distant shouts and cries, but they seemed far away. Panic began to rise in her chest as she realized the growing smell of smoke might mean fire. With renewed desperation, she pushed against the debris pinning her, but it refused to budge. Pain shot through her leg and she bit back a scream. Time passed in an agonizing blur. The smoke was thickening, making each breath more difficult than the last. Harriet's strength was fading when she heard the sound of boots crunching over broken glass and splintered wood. Someone was making their way through the wreckage. "Hello," she called, her voice stronger this time. "I'm here, I'm trapped." The footsteps quickened, and suddenly, a figure appeared through the haze of smoke. A man knelt beside her, his face partially obscured by a bandana pulled up to protect against the smoke. All she could make out were intense blue eyes that assessed her situation with quick precision. "Don't worry, miss. I'm going to get you out of here," he said, his voice deep and reassuring despite the urgency in his tone. Without hesitation, he braced himself against the heavy debris pinning her down. Muscles strained beneath his worn leather vest as he lifted the broken section of seat that had her trapped. "Can you move now?" he asked, holding the weight steady. Harriet tried to slide herself free but cried out as pain shot through her leg. "My leg, I think it's broken." The man nodded once. "All right then, hold on." With a final heave, he pushed the debris aside completely and in one fluid motion scooped her into his arms. As he carried her from the wreckage, Harriet caught glimpses of the devastation around them. The passenger cars lay scattered like discarded toys along the track. People were moving about, helping the injured. In the distance, she could see riders galloping toward them, presumably bringing help from the nearest town. The man carrying her moved with surprising gentleness despite his obvious strength. He navigated through the debris field and set her down carefully in the shade of a large rock formation away from the smoking wreckage. "Thank you," Harriet whispered, finally able to get a clear look at her rescuer as he pulled down his bandana. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jawline darkened by several days' worth of stubble. His hair, the color of sun-bleached wheat, fell in waves to his collar, and those blue eyes that had first caught her attention now studied her with concern. "Name's Quentin Ashford," he said, kneeling to examine her injured leg. "Most folks just call me Quinn." "Harriet Hamilton," she replied, wincing as his fingers gently probed her injury. "I was on my way home to St. George." "That's where I'm headed to," Quinn said, removing his kerchief and carefully binding it around a gash on her arm she hadn't even noticed until now. Town's not far, maybe 10 miles south. Train shouldn't have been going so fast around that bend. Do you think many people? Harriet couldn't finish the question, her eyes drifting back to the wreckage. There are casualties, he said solemnly, but help is coming. Saw a couple riders heading toward Cedar City to fetch the doctor. He reached for his canteen and offered it to her. Here, drink something. Harriet accepted gratefully, the cool water soothing her parched throat. Are you from St. George? She asked, trying to distract herself from the pain and chaos around them. Quinn shook his head. Just passing through, been working cattle up north for the Barlow outfit. Season's ending, so I'm headed south for winter work. He looked at her more closely. You've got family waiting for you, my parents, Harriet confirmed. They run Hamilton's Mercantile on Main Street. Recognition flickered in his eyes. I know the place. Your father sold me this hat last year. He tipped his worn Stetson with a hint of a smile that softened his weathered features. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a middle-aged man with a doctor's bag. I was in the first car, he explained, kneeling beside Harriet. Dr. Samuel Lewis. Let me take a look at that leg, miss. As the doctor examined her, Quinn stood and surveyed the wreckage. More people from nearby homesteads had arrived to help with the rescue efforts. Harriet watched him walk toward a group of men who were organizing the removal of debris to reach trapped passengers. Dr. Lewis confirmed what Harriet had suspected: her leg was indeed broken, though thankfully a clean break. He splinted it temporarily with pieces of wood from the wreckage and bandaged her other wounds. You'll need proper care in town, he advised. The nearest settlement with proper medical facilities is St. George. That's where I'm headed, Harriet said. The doctor nodded. Good. They're arranging transport for the injured. It'll be a rough journey by wagon, I'm afraid. Hours passed as the rescue efforts continued. The sun was beginning to set when Quinn returned to where Harriet rested against the rock. His shirt was now smudged with soot and sweat, his hands scraped from moving debris. They've got wagons coming, but not enough for everyone, he told her. It'll be tomorrow morning before the second group can leave. Harriet nodded, trying to mask her discomfort. The temporary splint helped, but the pain in her leg had grown more intense as the initial shock wore off. Quinn seemed to notice her discomfort. After a moment's consideration, he said, I've got my horse. I could take you to St. George tonight if you'd rather not wait for the wagons. Harriet hesitated only briefly. The thought of spending the night in the desert with her injuries was far less appealing than reaching proper care and her family sooner. Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden. No burden, he said simply. Doctor says you need proper care sooner rather than later anyway. After consulting with Dr. Lewis, who provided some laudanum for the pain and fresh bandages for the journey, Quinn helped Harriet to her feet. She couldn't put weight on her injured leg, so he lifted her once more into his arms and carried her to where a sturdy chestnut gelding was tethered to a scrub oak. With careful movements, Quinn settled her onto the saddle, then mounted behind her. One strong arm wrapped securely around her waist while the other held the reins. Try to relax, he instructed as they set off at a gentle pace. It's about 3 hours to St. George if we take it easy, which we will. Your leg needs to be still. As they left the wreckage behind, Harriet felt an unexpected mix of gratitude and guilt. There are others who need help more than I do, she murmured, and they're getting it, Quinn assured her. Doc's got things organized now. The most seriously injured are heading out in the first wagons. The desert landscape took on golden hues as the sun sank lower. Despite her circumstances, Harriet couldn't help but admire the beauty of the red rocks and distant mesas silhouetted against the darkening sky. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid presence of Quinn behind her provided unexpected comfort. Have you been away long? Quinn asked after they had ridden in silence for some time. 3 years, Harriet replied. I've been studying at a women's college in Boston. She felt rather than saw his surprise. College, that's not something you hear every day about a woman from these parts. My father believes women should be educated, she explained. He wanted me to have opportunities he never had. What did you study? Literature and history primarily. I'm hoping to teach at the school in St. George. Quinn was quiet for a moment. Must have been something, being in a big city like Boston. It was, Harriet agreed. Different in every way imaginable, but I missed this, she added, gesturing to the vast landscape around them. There's a kind of freedom here you can't find in the city. I know what you mean, Quinn said. Spent a year in Chicago once, felt like I couldn't breathe the whole time. As twilight deepened into night, the temperature dropped sharply. Harriet shivered despite her woolen traveling dress. Without comment, Quinn stopped the horse long enough to pull a blanket from his saddlebag and wrap it around her shoulders before continuing on. The pain in Harriet's leg had dulled to a persistent throb thanks to the laudanum, but the long ride was taking its toll. She found herself leaning more heavily against Quinn's chest, her head occasionally nodding forward as exhaustion threatened to overtake her. You can rest if you need to, Quinn told her, his voice a low rumble close to her ear. I won't let you fall. I should stay awake, she protested weakly. It doesn't seem fair for you to bear all the burden of this journey. She felt a soft chuckle vibrate through his chest. Miss Hamilton, I've ridden through blizzards in Wyoming and dust storms in Arizona. Carrying a lady safely to town is hardly a burden. Despite her best intentions, Harriet's eyes grew heavy. The rhythmic movement of the horse, the warmth of Quinn's body behind her, and the emotional and physical exhaustion of the day all conspired to pull her toward sleep. The last thing she remembered was the feeling of his arm tightening protectively around her waist as her consciousness slipped away. She woke to the sound of Quinn's voice, low and gentle. Miss Hamilton, we're approaching St. George. Harriet blinked awake, momentarily disoriented. The moon had risen, casting silver light over the landscape. Ahead, she could make out the outline of buildings and the distinctive shape of the white sandstone tabernacle that marked the center of St. George. How long was I asleep? She asked, embarrassed to have dozed off against a virtual stranger. About an hour, Quinn replied. You needed the rest. As they rode into town, a few people were still out despite the late hour. Word of the train accident must have reached St. George as several men approached them as soon as they recognized that Quinn was bringing in an injured passenger. The Hamilton girl, one man asked, peering up at her. Yes, Harriet confirmed. I need to get to my parents. They've been worried sick, the man said. Your father's organized a group to head out at first light to the wreck site. Your mother's waiting at home. Quinn guided his horse toward the main street. Where's their place? The Mercantile has living quarters above the shop, Harriet explained. On Main Street, just past the bank. They arrived at the two-story brick building that housed Hamilton's Mercantile a few minutes later. Before they could even dismount, the front door flew open and Harriet's mother rushed out, her face a mask of worry that transformed into relief at the sight of her daughter. Harriet, oh thank God. Elizabeth Hamilton cried, hurrying toward them. We heard about the accident and feared the worst. I'm all right, Mother, Harriet assured her as Quinn carefully helped her down from the horse. Just a broken leg and some cuts. This is Mr. Ashford. He rescued me from the wreckage and brought me here. Elizabeth's grateful eyes turned to Quinn. Mr. Ashford, we are deeply in your debt. Please come inside. Thomas, she called back toward the house. Send Billy for Dr. Jensen right away. Harriet's here and she's hurt. Harriet's father appeared in the doorway, his expression changing from confusion to joy to concern in quick succession. He hurried down the steps to assist Quinn in carrying Harriet inside, but the cowboy had already lifted her into his arms once more. I've got her, sir, Quinn said respectfully. Just show me where to take her. Inside the warm parlor, Quinn gently set Harriet down on a sofa that her mother had hastily prepared with pillows. As Elizabeth fussed over her daughter, Thomas Hamilton extended his hand to Quinn. Thomas Hamilton. I don't know how to thank you for bringing our daughter home safely. Quinn accepted the handshake. Quentin Ashford just did what anyone would do. Nonsense, Thomas insisted. From what Harriet tells us, you pulled her from a burning wreck and then rode hours through the desert to bring her to proper care. That's above and beyond what most would do. Before Quinn could respond, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Dr. Jensen. The physician was a man in his 50s with kind eyes and efficient hands. He examined Harriet thoroughly, confirming Dr. Lewis's diagnosis of a clean break. "You're a fortunate young woman," Dr. Jensen told her as he prepared to set the bone properly. "This could have been much worse." "Mr. Ashford," he added, turning to Quinn, who stood awkwardly by the door, "you did well with the transport. The temporary splint held nicely." Quinn nodded acknowledgement but remained silent as the doctor worked. After the bone was set and the leg properly splinted with more substantial materials, Dr. Jensen administered more laudanum for the pain and instructed Elizabeth on Harriet's care. "Bed rest for at least 3 weeks," he advised. "Then we'll see about getting her mobile with crutches. The other cuts and bruises will heal on their own with proper cleaning." As the doctor packed up his supplies, Thomas Hamilton approached Quinn again. "It's late, and you must be exhausted after your journey. We have a spare room upstairs. Please stay the night." Quinn hesitated. "That's kind of you, sir, but I don't want to impose." "Impose?" Thomas laughed. "Young man, you saved our daughter's life. A bed for the night is the least we can offer." From the sofa, Harriet spoke up, her voice soft but clear despite the laudanum beginning to take effect. "Please stay, Mr. Ashford. I haven't properly thanked you yet." Something in her eyes made it impossible for Quinn to refuse. He nodded his acceptance, and Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "Excellent. I'll show you to your room after you've had something to eat." "Beth, is there any of that stew left?" While Elizabeth prepared a late meal, Quinn tended to his horse, ensuring the animal was properly stabled behind the mercantile. By the time he returned, the table was set with a hearty bowl of beef stew, fresh bread, and coffee. "Sit, eat," Thomas encouraged. "Harriet has told us a little about you. You're a cattleman?" Quinn nodded, taking a seat. "Yes, sir. Been working ranches since I was 16. Mostly up in Wyoming and Montana, but I've been making my way south these past few years. Any family?" Elizabeth asked, setting a glass of water beside his plate. "No, madam. Lost my parents when I was young. Raised by my uncle until he passed when I was 15. Been on my own since then." Harriet, who had been moved to a more comfortable position on the sofa, watched the exchange with interest. Despite his obvious fatigue, Quinn answered her parents' questions politely, revealing little pieces of himself, his early years on a small farm in Nebraska, his journey west at 16 with nothing but a horse and the clothes on his back, the various ranches where he'd worked over the years. "I've been with the Barlow outfit up near Salt Lake for the past 6 months, he explained. "But winter work is scarce there, so I thought I'd try my luck further south. I hear the Simmons Ranch outside St. George might be hiring." "Owen Simmons is a good man," Thomas confirmed. "His foreman, Mac Gregor, is fair but demanding. If you're looking for work there, I'd be happy to put in a word." Quinn looked surprised at the offer. "That's mighty generous of you, Mr. Hamilton." "It's the least I can do," Thomas replied, "and please call me Thomas." By the time Quinn finished eating, Harriet had drifted into a laudanum-induced sleep on the sofa. Elizabeth gently draped a quilt over her daughter. "Poor dear is exhausted," she murmured. "I'll sit with her a while longer before we move her upstairs." Thomas showed Quinn to the spare room, a simple but comfortable space with a clean bed, washstand, and small writing desk. "Bathrooms down the hall if you want to wash up," Thomas told him. "There should be clean towels in the cabinet." Left alone, Quinn took stock of his surroundings. It had been a long time since he'd slept in a proper bed in a family home. Most of his nights were spent in bunkhouses with other ranch hands or under the stars during cattle drives. There was something both comforting and disquieting about the domesticity around him. After washing away the grime of the day, Quinn returned to his room. Through the thin walls, he could hear Thomas and a couple of other men moving Harriet upstairs to her bedroom, their voices low and careful. He sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of how exhausted he truly was. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of Harriet's face, pale against the darkening sky as he'd carried her from the wreckage, the mixture of pain, fear, and quiet strength in her eyes. Morning came with the sounds of a household awakening. Quinn dressed quickly in his trail-worn clothes and made his way downstairs. Thomas Hamilton was already in the kitchen brewing coffee. "Good morning," Thomas greeted him. "Sleep well?" "Yes, sir, thank you." Thomas poured him a cup of coffee. Beth's checking on Harriet, Doctor. Jensen will be back this morning to see how she's doing. He paused, studying Quinn over the rim of his cup. I meant what I said about putting in a word with Simmons. In fact, I'm meeting him for lunch today at the hotel restaurant. You're welcome to join us. Quinn was taken aback by the continued generosity. I appreciate that, but I don't want to take advantage of your kindness. Thomas waved away his concern. Nonsense. Owen's an old friend, and he's always looking for reliable men. From what Harriet told us, you're certainly that. Before Quinn could respond, Elizabeth descended the stairs. Harriet's awake, she announced, and asking for you, Mr. Ashford, if you don't mind. Quinn set down his coffee cup. Of course. He followed Elizabeth upstairs to a room at the end of the hall. The door was partially open, and Elizabeth knocked lightly before pushing it wider. Harriet, dear, Mr. Ashford is here to see you. Harriet was propped up in bed, her splinted leg carefully positioned on a pillow. Despite the ordeal of the previous day, color had returned to her cheeks, and her hazel eyes brightened when she saw Quinn. Mr. Ashford, she greeted him, I wanted to thank you properly for what you did yesterday. Elizabeth tactfully excused herself, leaving them alone. Quinn remained standing awkwardly near the doorway, hat in his hands. No need for thanks, Miss Hamilton. I'm just glad you're on the mend. Please sit, she said, indicating a chair near the bed. And I think after everything that happened yesterday, you can call me Harriet. Quinn took the offered seat, placing his hat on his knee. Then I'm Quinn, Harriet smiled. Quinn, I realized last night that I know very little about the man who saved my life. My father says you're looking for work at the Simmons Ranch. That's the plan, he confirmed. Your father has kindly offered to introduce me to Mr. Simmons today. That's wonderful, Harriet said. The Simmons Ranch is one of the largest in the area. They're good people. Quinn nodded. I've heard as much. He hesitated, then added, Your father mentioned you'll be bedridden for a few weeks. I'm sorry the homecoming you planned has been complicated. Harriet's laugh was unexpected and melodious. That's certainly one way to put it, not exactly how I imagined my return to St. George. Her expression grew more serious. Have you heard any news from the accident site? Your father received a telegram this morning. Relief efforts continued through the night. 12 confirmed dead, 37 injured. They're still investigating the cause, but early reports suggest a washed-out section of track from recent rains. Harriet closed her eyes briefly. 12 dead. It could have been worse, I suppose. It could have been, Quinn agreed quietly. A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy with the shared memory of the chaos and tragedy they'd witnessed. Will you be staying in St. George? Harriet finally asked. If you get the position at the Simmons Ranch, I mean. That would be the plan. They offer year-round work, from what I hear. It would be a change from the seasonal jobs I've been taking. It might be nice, Harriet observed, to stay in one place for a while. Quinn's smile was slight but genuine. It might at that. Their conversation was interrupted by Elizabeth's return with Dr. Jensen. Quinn stood, ready to take his leave. I should let you rest. The doctor needs to examine you. Will I see you again before you go? Harriet asked, something in her tone suggesting she hoped the answer would be yes. I expect so, Quinn replied. Your father invited me to lunch with him and Mr. Simmons. Relief flickered across her face. Good, I'd like to hear how it goes. Quinn nodded, then stepped aside to allow Dr. Jensen access to his patient. As he left the room, he found himself unexpectedly looking forward to returning later and sharing news of his meeting with Simmons. The lunch meeting at the St. George Hotel's restaurant proved successful. Owen Simmons, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes, took Thomas Hamilton's recommendation seriously and spent most of the meal asking Quinn detailed questions about his experience with cattle. Mac Gregor needs someone who can handle breaking horses too, Simmons said as they finished their meal. You done much of that? Yes, sir, Quinn confirmed. Worked as a bronc buster for the Miller spread in Wyoming for nearly 2 years. Simmons nodded appreciatively. Good, good. Well, I like what I hear, Ashford. The job's yours if you want it. Pays $40 a month plus room and board in the bunkhouse. We provide meals at the ranch house. I appreciate the opportunity, sir, Quinn said, extending his hand across the table. When can you start? Simmons asked, accepting the handshake. Quinn glanced at Thomas, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. I've got some business in town for a couple of days, Quinn said. Would Monday be acceptable? That'll work, Simmons agreed. Come out Monday morning. Ranch is about 10 miles southeast of town. Anyone can point you in the right direction. After Simmons departed, Thomas clapped Quinn on the shoulder. Congratulations. Owen doesn't usually hire on the spot like that. He must have been impressed. Thank you for the introduction, Quinn said sincerely. I won't forget it. Thomas waved away his thanks. You saved my daughter's life. A job recommendation is nothing in comparison. He paused, then added, You mentioned business in town. Is there anything I can help with? Quinn hesitated. Actually, I need to find more permanent lodging than the hotel until I move to the ranch. And I could use some supplies. Thought I'd check your store first, if that's all right. Of course, Thomas said. As for lodging, why not stay with us for the next few days? The room is yours if you want it. Quinn started to decline, but Thomas cut him off. Before you say no out of politeness, consider that it would ease my wife's mind greatly. She's worried about Harriet being home alone during the day while we tend the store. Having you around would be a comfort to her. Put that way, Quinn found he couldn't refuse. If you're sure I won't be imposing, then I accept. Thank you. They walked back to the mercantile together, where Thomas helped Quinn select the supplies he needed: new work gloves, a sturdy shirt to replace one torn during the rescue, ammunition for his revolver, and various personal items. Put away your money, Thomas insisted when Quinn reached for his wallet. Consider it payment for looking after Harriet while we mind the store, Quinn frowned. Sir, I can't accept. You can and you will, Thomas said firmly. Besides, Beth has likely already told Harriet you'll be staying a few more days. Wouldn't want to disappoint the invalid, would we? There was a knowing glint in Thomas's eye that made Quinn wonder just how much the older man had noticed about his interest in Harriet. Rather than argue further, he simply nodded his acceptance. Upstairs, Quinn found Harriet sitting up in bed, a book open in her lap. She looked up when he knocked on the open door, her face brightening. Quinn, how did the meeting go? Got the job, he said, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. Starting Monday. That's wonderful, Harriet exclaimed. The Simmons Ranch is only about 10 miles from town. You'll be practically a neighbor. Quinn leaned against the doorframe. Your father's convinced me to stay here until then. Says your mother would feel better having someone around while they mind the store. A faint blush colored Harriet's cheeks. I may have mentioned that it gets rather lonely being confined to bed all day. Mother worries. Well, I'm happy to ease her mind, Quinn said. He nodded toward the book in her lap. What are you reading? Wuthering Heights, she replied. Have you read it? Quinn shook his head. Can't say that I have. Is it good? It's... Harriet seemed to search for the right word. Intense. A love story, but not a simple one. The best stories rarely are simple, I expect, Quinn observed. Harriet studied him with newfound interest. No, they're not. Would you like me to read some of it to you? It might help pass the time, Quinn hesitated. Reading novels wasn't something cowboys typically admitted to enjoying. But there was something in Harriet's expression, an absence of judgment, a genuine desire to share something she clearly loved that made him nod. I'd like that. Over the next 3 days, a routine developed. Quinn would help Thomas open the store in the morning, then spend much of the day upstairs with Harriet. Sometimes she would read to him from her books, her voice bringing to life worlds and characters he'd never encountered. Other times, they would simply talk about her experiences in Boston, his travels across the Western Territories, their hopes and observations about life. On the second day, Quinn brought a checkerboard up from the parlor, and they spent hours engaged in friendly competition. Harriet proved to be a formidable opponent, winning more games than she lost. Where did you learn to play like that? Quinn asked after she captured 3 of his pieces in a single move. Harriet grinned. My father taught me when I was young. He always said a sharp mind was more valuable than a pretty face. You seem to have been blessed with both, Quinn remarked, then immediately looked embarrassed at his own boldness. Harriet's cheeks flushed, but her smile remained. That's very kind of you to say. In the evenings, Quinn would join the Hamilton family for dinner. Elizabeth proved to be an excellent cook, and the conversation around the table was lively and engaging. Quinn, who had spent most of his adult life eating in bunkhouses or around campfires, found himself increasingly drawn to the warmth and stability of family life. On Sunday evening, his last night before starting work at the Simmons Ranch, Thomas opened a bottle of good whiskey after dinner. As the women retired to the parlor, the two men sat at the kitchen table, each nursing a small glass. "You've been good for Harriet," Thomas said after they had sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "I haven't seen her this animated since before she left for Boston." Quinn stared into his glass. "She's an extraordinary woman, smart, kind." "That she is," Thomas agreed. "Beth and I worried about her coming back here after 3 years in Boston. We thought she might find St. George too provincial after city life." "She seems happy to be home," Quinn observed. Thomas nodded. "I think she is, especially now." He gave Quinn a meaningful look. "The Simmons Ranch isn't far. You'd be welcome to visit whenever you have time off." "I'd like that," Quinn admitted. "If Harriet wouldn't mind the company." Thomas laughed softly. "I think we both know she wouldn't." He finished his whiskey and set the glass down. "I know we've only known you a few days, Ashford, but I'm a good judge of character. Had to be in my line of work. You're a good man, the kind of father wouldn't mind seeing call on his daughter." Quinn felt a strange mixture of surprise and gratitude at the implicit permission in Thomas's words. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Quinn packed his few belongings, said his goodbyes to Thomas and Elizabeth, and headed upstairs for one last visit with Harriet before leaving for the ranch. He found her seated in a chair by the window, her splinted leg propped on a footstool. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her auburn hair, which fell in loose waves around her shoulders rather than in the tight bun she'd worn while traveling. "You're looking well," Quinn said, lingering in the doorway. "The chair is an improvement over the bed," Harriet smiled. "Doctor." "Jensen says I'm healing nicely. Another week or two and I might be able to try crutches." Her smile faltered slightly. "So you're off to the Simmons Ranch today?" "Yes," Quinn confirmed. "Mr. Simmons expects me by noon." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with things neither quite knew how to say. "I've enjoyed these past few days," Harriet finally offered. "Your company has made being confined much more bearable." "I've enjoyed it too," Quinn said. He took a step into the room. "I was wondering. That is, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to call on you when I have time off from the ranch." Harriet's face brightened. "I'd like that very much." "Simmons gives hands every other Sunday off," Quinn explained, "and Saturday evenings most weeks unless there's pressing work." "Then I shall look forward to Saturdays and every other Sunday," Harriet said with a soft smile. Quinn hesitated, then crossed the room to stand before her. "Harriet, I know we've only known each other a short time, but sometimes a short time is enough to know what matters," she interrupted gently. Taking courage from her words, Quinn reached for her hand. "May I write to you when I can't be here in person?" "I would be disappointed if you didn't," she replied, her fingers curling around his. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a current of unspoken understanding passing between them. Then, with reluctance, Quinn released her hand and stepped back. "I should go." "Mr. Simmons will be expecting me," Harriet nodded. "Be careful on the ride, and Quinn," he paused at the door. "Yes, thank you, not just for saving me from the train, but for everything since." Quinn tipped his hat, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Until Saturday, Miss Hamilton." "Until Saturday, Mr. Ashford." The Simmons Ranch was larger than Quinn had anticipated, a sprawling operation with over 2,000 head of cattle, extensive grazing lands, and a reputation as one of the most successful ranches in southern Utah. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure of local red stone, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived. Angus MacGregor, the foreman, was a barrel-chested Scotsman with a no-nonsense attitude and a reputation for working men hard but fairly. He showed Quinn around the operation, introduced him to the other hands, and assigned him a bunk. Simmons says you've got experience breaking horses, MacGregor said as they walked toward the corral where several young mustangs pranced nervously. We've got 6 that need gentling before winter sets in. That'll be your primary job, along with regular ranch duties. Quinn nodded, already assessing the horses with a practiced eye. The dun looks promising, good conformation. MacGregor gave him an approving look. Aye, he's the pick of the bunch. Caught him near the Arizona border last month. Got spirit, but intelligence too. The work was hard but satisfying. Quinn had always had a way with horses, an instinctive understanding of their fears and needs that made him particularly good at breaking the wild ones to saddle. By the end of his first week, he'd made significant progress with 2 of the mustangs and earned the respect of the other ranch hands through his quiet competence and willingness to pull his weight in all tasks. On Saturday evening, as promised, MacGregor released the men who weren't on essential duties. Quinn cleaned up as best he could, changed into his one decent shirt, and rode into St. George. His heart beat a little faster as he approached the Hamiltons' mercantile, anticipation mingling with a nervousness he wasn't accustomed to feeling. Elizabeth Hamilton greeted him warmly when he entered the store. "Quinn, we've been expecting you. Harriet's upstairs in the parlor." She's been counting the hours, though she'd never admit it. Quinn couldn't help the smile that spread across his face at her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Hamilton. Beth, please," she corrected him. "After all, you're practically family now." The casual comment caught Quinn off guard, but before he could respond, Elizabeth was already calling for Thomas to mind the store while she prepared coffee and snacks for their visitor. Upstairs, Quinn found Harriet seated on the sofa, a pair of wooden crutches leaning against the wall beside her. Her face lit up when she saw him, and he was struck anew by how beautiful she was, especially when she smiled. "You're earlier than I expected," she said as he took a seat across from her. "MacGregor let us go at 4, Quinn explained, "and I didn't see any reason to delay." A faint blush colored Harriet's cheeks. "I'm glad. How was your first week at the ranch?" Quinn told her about the mustangs, the other ranch hands, and the daily routine of ranch life. She listened attentively, asking insightful questions that showed genuine interest. "And what about you?" Quinn asked when he'd finished his account. "I see you've graduated to crutches." "Just yesterday," Harriet confirmed. "Dr. Jensen says I'm healing faster than expected. I can move around the house now, though stairs are still a challenge. Father carries me down in the morning and back up in the evening." "That's wonderful progress," Quinn said sincerely. "Will you be able to start teaching soon?" Harriet's expression clouded slightly. "That's complicated. The school board met yesterday. They're willing to hold the position for me, but not until my leg is fully healed. They've hired a substitute teacher in the meantime." Quinn frowned. "But that could be months." "Exactly," Harriet sighed. "I understand their reasoning, but it's frustrating. I've been looking forward to teaching for so long." "What will you do in the meantime?" Harriet brightened. "Actually, I've been thinking of writing articles for the territorial newspaper. The editor, Mr. Pratt, is an old friend of my father's. He's agreed to consider publishing some pieces about life in the East, educational philosophies, that sort of thing." "That sounds like a perfect use of your talents," Quinn said, genuinely impressed by her resilience and initiative. Their conversation was interrupted by Elizabeth bringing in a tray of coffee and sliced apple cake. She set it down on the small table between them and discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone once more. The evening passed quickly in comfortable conversation. Quinn found himself talking more than he had in years, sharing stories of his travels and experiences that he'd never told anyone. There was something about Harriet that made him want to open up, to let her see parts of himself he usually kept hidden. As the mantel clock struck 9, Quinn reluctantly stood to leave. "I should get back to the ranch. We start early, even on Sundays." Harriet nodded, though disappointment flickered in her eyes. "Will you be able to come next Saturday as well?" "Try and stop me," Quinn said with a smile. He hesitated, then added, "May I write to you during the week? I know it's not far, but I'd love that," Harriet interrupted. "And I'll write back, of course." Quinn helped her to her feet, steadying her as she reached for her crutches. For a moment, They stood close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her hair. The impulse to kiss her was almost overwhelming, but he restrained himself, settling instead for lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply sincere. "Until next Saturday, Harriet," her eyes, warm and bright, held his. "I'll be counting the days, Quinn." The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their courtship. Quinn wrote to Harriet twice weekly, simple but heartfelt letters describing his work at the ranch and his thoughts about their growing relationship. Harriet responded with equally thoughtful letters, often including passages from books she thought he might enjoy. Every Saturday evening, Quinn rode into town to spend time with Harriet and her family. As her mobility improved, their activities expanded. They played chess and cards, read together, and eventually, when Harriet was steady enough on her crutches, took short walks through town, Quinn always close by her side in case she needed support. On the Sundays when Quinn had the full day off, he would attend church with the Hamiltons, an experience that reminded him of his childhood before his parents' deaths. Afterwards, they would share Sunday dinner, and sometimes Quinn would stay for the afternoon, helping Thomas with projects around the house or simply enjoying the family's company. By mid-December, 6 weeks after the train accident, Harriet had progressed to using a cane. The territorial newspaper had published 3 of her articles, which had been well received by the community. Quinn, meanwhile, had successfully broken all 6 Mustangs and earned a reputation as the best horse trainer the Simmons Ranch had ever employed. The Christmas season brought festive decorations to St. George and a light dusting of snow that was unusual for the desert town. On the Saturday before Christmas, Quinn arrived at the Hamiltons with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle. "Mac Gregor said I could cut one from the North Ridge," he explained as Thomas helped him carry it inside. "Thought you might like to have a Christmas tree." The delight on Harriet's face was worth every minute of the cold ride with the tree. "It's perfect, we haven't had a tree in years." The evening was spent decorating the tree with ornaments Elizabeth retrieved from storage handmade wooden figures, fabric stars, and paper chains that Harriet remembered making as a child. The simple domestic activity filled Quinn with a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced since his parents were alive. As the evening drew to a close, Quinn helped Thomas carry the last of the decoration boxes back to the storage room. When they returned to the parlor, they found Elizabeth had tactfully retired for the night, leaving Harriet alone by the tree, its candles casting a warm glow over her face. Thomas cleared his throat. "I believe I'll turn in as well. Good night, Quinn. Don't stay up too late, Harriet." Once they were alone, Quinn joined Harriet by the tree. She had set aside her cane and stood supporting herself with one hand on the mantel. "Are you sure you should be standing without your cane?" Quinn asked, concern evident in his voice. Harriet smiled. "Doctor Jensen says I need to practice putting weight on it. Besides," she added with a touch of mischief, "I wanted to see if I could stand on my own for what I hope is about to happen." Quinn's heart skipped a beat. "And what might that be?" In answer, Harriet pointed upward. Quinn followed her gaze to see a sprig of mistletoe hanging from the ceiling directly above them. "Did you plan this?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe," Harriet admitted. "Though Mother might have helped with the placement, I can't exactly climb on furniture yet." Quinn stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. "Far be it from me to ignore such a clear invitation." With gentle care, he placed one hand at her waist to steady her while the other came up to cradle her cheek. Harriet's eyes fluttered closed as he leaned in, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was tender and restrained at first, but when Harriet's arms wound around his neck, Quinn deepened it, pouring weeks of longing and growing affection into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I rode away to the Simmons Ranch," Quinn confessed, his forehead resting against hers. "I've been wanting you to do that since you carried me from the train wreck," Harriet replied with a soft laugh. Quinn drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "Harriet Hamilton, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I'm in love with you. Joy bloomed across Harriet's face. "And I'm in love with you, Quinn Ashford." He kissed her again, briefly but with no less feeling. "I don't have much to offer you yet," he said when they parted. "Just my heart and my promise to build a good life for us." "That's more than enough," Harriet assured him. "We have time." Christmas Day found Quinn once again at the Hamilton household, joining them for a festive dinner after church services. He had spent a significant portion of his savings on gifts: a leather-bound journal for Harriet, a fine pipe for Thomas, and an embroidered shawl for Elizabeth that he'd ordered from the Mercantile's catalog. In return, the Hamiltons presented him with a handsome new saddle blanket embroidered with his initials, a book of poetry that Harriet had selected specifically for him, and the warm acceptance of a family that was quickly becoming his own. That evening, with Thomas and Elizabeth's blessing, Quinn took Harriet for a short sleigh ride through town, bundled together beneath thick blankets as snowflakes drifted lazily from the darkening sky. "It's like something from a storybook," Harriet murmured, nestled against his side. "I never thought I'd have this." Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple. "Have what?" "This feeling," she explained. "Like everything is exactly as it should be, like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Quinn tightened his arm around her. "I know what you mean. I've spent my whole adult life wandering, never staying in one place too long. Never thought I'd find someone that felt like home." Harriet turned her face up to his, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes. "And have you found home?" Quinn's answer was in his kiss, gentle but certain beneath the winter sky. As winter gave way to spring, Harriet's leg healed completely. By March, she was walking without assistance, though Dr. Jensen warned that she might always have a slight limp in cold weather. The school board, true to their word, offered her the teaching position for the upcoming term starting in September. Quinn continued to excel at the Simmons Ranch. When the old foreman, Mac Gregor, announced his intention to retire and return to Scotland, Owen Simmons promoted Quinn to the position, a significant advancement that came with increased pay and a small cabin of his own instead of a bunk in the shared quarters. On a warm evening in late April, Quinn took Harriet for a ride to a mesa overlooking St. George. The desert was in bloom, carpets of wildflowers adding splashes of color to the red landscape. They dismounted near the edge, where Quinn spread a blanket for them to sit and watch the sunset. "It's beautiful up here," Harriet said, gazing out at the panoramic view. "I discovered it a few weeks ago while tracking strays," Quinn explained. "Been waiting for the perfect evening to bring you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. When the first stars began to appear, Quinn shifted to face Harriet. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice more serious than usual. Harriet turned to him, curiosity in her eyes. "About what?" "About us, about the future." Quinn took her hands in his. "I love you, Harriet. These past months have been the happiest of my life. I can't imagine going back to the way things were before I met you." Harriet squeezed his hands. "I feel the same way." Taking a deep breath, Quinn reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I spoke with your father last week. He gave me his blessing." Opening the box, he revealed a simple but elegant ring with a small diamond set in gold. "Harriet Hamilton, will you marry me?" Tears welled in Harriet's eyes as she nodded emphatically. "Yes, yes, of course I will." With slightly trembling fingers, Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. They agreed to marry in August, before the school term began. The engagement announcement in the territorial newspaper caused a stir of excitement in St. George, where the story of their meeting during the train accident had become something of a local legend. The wedding preparations kept both families busy throughout the summer. Quinn, with Thomas's help and advice, secured a small plot of land halfway between the Simmons Ranch and St. George, where he began building a modest but comfortable house for them. Harriet, meanwhile, prepared for both her new role as a wife and her upcoming position as the town's schoolteacher. On a perfect August morning, Quinn stood at the front of St. George's small church, watching as Harriet walked down the aisle on her father's arm. She wore a gown of ivory silk that Elizabeth had spent months sewing, and her face glowed with happiness as her eyes met Quinn's. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, respect, and partnership that reflected both their traditional values and Harriet's progressive education. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to many eyes in the congregation. The celebration afterward was a community affair, with tables set up in the town square and everyone contributing food and music. As the new Mr. and Mrs. Ashford danced beneath strings of lanterns in the warm evening air, Harriet leaned close to her husband's ear. "You ever think about how differently our lives might have gone if that train hadn't derailed?" she asked. Quinn pulled back to look into her eyes. "I try not to dwell on what might have been, but I do thank God every day for bringing you into my life, even if the circumstances were terrible." "It's strange," Harriet mused. "Something so tragic led to something so beautiful." "Life's like that sometimes," Quinn said, drawing her closer as they swayed to the music. "The worst moments can lead to the best ones if you're brave enough to keep going." Harriet rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I think that's a lesson worth teaching." "You'll be an amazing teacher," Quinn said with conviction. "Those children are lucky to have you." As the celebration continued around them, Quinn and Harriet took a moment to stand apart from the crowd, looking up at the star-filled desert sky. "What are you thinking?" Harriet asked, noticing the thoughtful expression on her new husband's face. Quinn smiled down at her, love evident in every line of his face. "I was just thinking that for a man who spent most of his life with no fixed address, no family to speak of, I've ended up with more of a home than I ever dreamed possible." Harriet stood on tiptoe to kiss him, a promise and a blessing all in one. "Welcome home, Quentin Ashford." Life settled into a rhythm for the newly married couple. Harriet began teaching at the St. George School, quickly earning a reputation as a kind but demanding teacher who brought fresh educational ideas from her time in the East. Quinn's position as foreman of the Simmons Ranch kept him busy, but he made sure to be home every evening to share dinner with his wife. Their small house between town and the ranch became a warm and welcoming place, filled with books Harriet collected and furniture Quinn built with his own hands. On weekends, they often hosted dinner for Thomas and Elizabeth or for friends from town and the ranch. In the spring of 1887, a year and a half after the train accident that brought them together, Harriet discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought joy not only to the couple, but to the entire Hamilton family and their circle of friends in St. George. "I'll need to find a replacement teacher for the end of the term," Harriet mused one evening as she and Quinn sat on their front porch, watching the sunset. "The baby will come in November, according to Dr. Jensen." Quinn placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Will you want to go back to teaching afterward?" Harriet covered his hand with hers. "Not right away, but eventually, yes. I love teaching too much to give it up entirely." "We'll make it work," Quinn promised. "Whatever you want to do, we'll find a way." As Harriet's pregnancy progressed, Quinn became increasingly protective, insisting on driving her to and from the schoolhouse each day despite her good-natured protests that she was perfectly capable of walking the short distance. "Humor me," he would say, helping her into the wagon. "It gives me peace of mind." The baby, a boy they named Thomas Quentin Ashford after both their fathers, arrived on a cold November night in 1887. Dr. Jensen pronounced him perfectly healthy with his mother's intelligence and his father's strong constitution. Parenthood brought new challenges and joys to their marriage. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, often carrying little Thomas with him around the house and yard while completing his chores. Harriet found motherhood both more difficult and more rewarding than she had anticipated, discovering reserves of patience and love she hadn't known she possessed. When Thomas was nearly a year old, Owen Simmons approached Quinn with an unexpected proposal. The older man was considering scaling back his operation as he aged, and he offered to sell Quinn a portion of the ranch land at a favorable price. I've been watching you these past 2 years, Simmons explained. You've got a good head for the business side of ranching, not just the work itself. You could build something of your own on that north section. The opportunity was too good to pass up. With Thomas Hamilton's help securing a loan from the bank, Quinn purchased the land and began the process of establishing his own small cattle operation alongside his continued duties as foreman for Simmons. Harriet supported the venture wholeheartedly, taking on the bookkeeping for their fledgling ranch in the evenings after Thomas was asleep. Her education proved valuable as she implemented modern accounting practices that helped them track expenses and profits more efficiently than most local ranchers. "We make a good team, Mrs. Ashford," Quinn remarked one evening as they sat at the kitchen table reviewing the quarterly figures. "Your brain and my brawn," Harriet laughed. "You have plenty of brain yourself, Mr. Ashford, and I like to think I'm not entirely without practical skills." In the spring of 1890, their family grew again with the arrival of a daughter, Elizabeth Ann Ashford, named for both their mothers. With 2 small children, Harriet decided to postpone her return to teaching, instead focusing on raising their family and helping Quinn develop their ranch. The Ashford Ranch, though modest compared to the Simmons operation, gained a reputation for quality stock and fair dealings. Quinn's expertise with horses also became widely known, and ranchers from as far away as Nevada began bringing difficult animals to him for training. As their children grew, so did their home and ranch. Quinn added rooms to the house as needed, and they gradually increased their herd size and grazing lands. By the time Thomas started school in 1893, the Ashford Ranch employed 3 full-time hands and was turning a reliable profit. Harriet eventually returned to teaching part-time, taking on advanced students 2 days a week while her mother or a hired girl watched Elizabeth. Her articles for the territorial newspaper continued as well, expanding to include pieces on agricultural developments and ranch management based on their experiences. In 1895, a decade after the train accident that brought them together, Quinn and Harriet hosted a large gathering at their ranch to celebrate the anniversary. Thomas and Elizabeth Hamilton were there, of course, along with Owen Simmons, Dr. Jensen, and many friends from town and neighboring ranches. As twilight fell, Quinn found Harriet standing alone on the porch, watching their children play with the other youngsters in the yard. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, slipping an arm around her waist. Harriet leaned into him with a contented sigh. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in 10 years, how much we've built together." "Any regrets?" Quinn asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Harriet replied, turning to face him. At 33, she was more beautiful to him than ever, the passing years having added character and wisdom to her features without diminishing their loveliness. "You?" Quinn shook his head, drawing her closer. "Only that it took a train wreck for us to find each other." "Seems like there should have been an easier way," Harriet laughed softly. "Perhaps, but then you might not have had the opportunity to play the hero, carrying me dramatically from the wreckage. As I recall, you weren't particularly impressed with my heroics at the time," Quinn teased. "You were more concerned about others who might need help." "That's because I didn't yet know what a remarkable man had come to my rescue," Harriet countered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. Their moment was interrupted by 7-year-old Thomas running up to them, his younger sister trailing behind. "Pa, Uncle Owen says he's going to show us the new colt. Can we go see?" Quinn ruffled his son's hair, which was the same wheat blonde as his own. "Of course. Just mind what Uncle Owen tells you about keeping your distance." As the children raced off to the barn, Harriet slipped her hand into Quinn's. "Shall we join them? I'd like to see this colt myself." "In a minute," Quinn said, keeping her beside him. "First, I want to tell you something." Harriet looked up at him expectantly. "What is it?" 10 years ago, when I pulled you from that train wreck, I was a drifter with no real home and no real future, just a man moving from job to job, place to place." Quinn took both her hands in his. "You changed everything, Harriet. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. Every good thing in my life came through you." Tears glistened in Harriet's eyes. "Oh, Quinn, you gave me just as much. Adventure, passion, partnership, things I feared I might never find in St. George. You're the best man I've ever known, and I fall more in love with you every day." Their kiss was interrupted by Elizabeth's small voice calling from the barn. "Mama, Papa, come see the baby horse." Hand in hand, they walked toward the barn, toward their children and the life they had built together from the most unlikely of beginnings. As the years passed, the Ashford family and their ranch continued to thrive. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's love of books and his father's affinity for horses. Elizabeth, spirited and determined, showed an aptitude for numbers that suggested she might one day take over the business side of the ranch. Two more children joined the family, Samuel in 1896 and Grace in 1899, completing their family with 2 boys and 2 girls. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing brood, and the ranch prospered under Quinn and Harriet's complementary leadership. In 1905, 20 years after the train accident, Thomas Hamilton passed away peacefully in his sleep. Quinn and Harriet supported Elizabeth through her grief, eventually bringing her to live with them at the ranch, where she became a beloved grandmother figure to their children. Life brought its challenges: drought years that tested their resources, economic downturns that required careful management, childhood illnesses that kept them up through worried nights. But through it all, Quinn and Harriet's partnership remained strong, their love deepening with shared experiences both difficult and joyful. Their children grew up and began to make their own ways in the world. Thomas attended university in Salt Lake City, returning with a degree in veterinary medicine that proved invaluable to both their ranch and the surrounding community. Elizabeth, true to her early promise, became the financial manager for the ranch, implementing modern practices that kept them profitable even in changing times. Samuel showed an interest in politics and law, eventually becoming a territorial representative and later a state legislator after Utah achieved statehood. Grace, the youngest, inherited her mother's love of teaching and took over Harriet's position at the school when she finally retired from formal education. Through it all, through every change and challenge, Quinn and Harriet remained each other's constant. Even as gray threaded their hair and lines creased their faces, the love that had begun in the aftermath of tragedy continued to sustain them. In their later years, they gradually handed over the day-to-day operations of the ranch to Thomas and his wife, Marie, allowing themselves more time for the simple pleasures of life, reading together on the porch, playing with grandchildren, occasionally traveling to visit far-flung family members or see places they'd long discussed. On the 50th anniversary of the train accident, now well into their 70s, Quinn and Harriet returned to the site where their story had begun. The landscape had changed. A proper station now stood where there had once been only a water tower, and the track had long since been repaired and improved. But the red rock formations that had witnessed their first meeting remained eternal. Standing there, leaning slightly on a walking stick that had become necessary in recent years, Quinn looked down at his wife. Her auburn hair had turned to silver, but her hazel eyes remained as bright and intelligent as the day he'd first seen them through the smoke of the wreckage. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what would have happened if that train hadn't derailed?" Harriet smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. "Sometimes, but then I think that somehow, some way we would have found each other eventually." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "You sound awfully sure of that." "I am," Harriet said with conviction. "Some things are simply meant to be, Quinn, and we were meant to be." Quinn pressed a kiss to her forehead, his heart as full at 73 as it had been at 28. "As usual, Mrs. Ashford, you're right." They stood together for a long moment, watching the sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape. Their life together had not always been easy, but it had always been rich with love, with family, with purpose and meaning. "Ready to head home?" Quinn finally asked. Harriet nodded, slipping her hand into his as naturally as she had done thousands of times over the decades of their marriage. "Let's go home." Hand in hand, They walked back to the wagon where their oldest grandson waited to drive them back to the ranch, back to the home, and the life they had built together from the most unlikely of beginnings. In the years that followed, Quinn and Harriet Ashford became something of a legend in southern Utah, the cowboy who had rescued a young woman from a train wreck and the educated Eastern-schooled woman who had captured his heart. Their story was told and retold, sometimes embellished but always centered on the truth that the greatest love stories often begin in unexpected ways. When Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Harriet was by his side, holding his hand as she had done through 54 years of marriage. She followed him less than a year later, having said she was simply waiting to finish organizing the family history she had been compiling for their children and grandchildren. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery in St. George beneath a headstone that bore a simple epitaph. Quinn and Harriet Ashford, their love was stronger than the wreckage from which it emerged. The ranch they built continued under the stewardship of their descendants, a living testament to the life and legacy of a drifting cowboy and a college-educated woman who found each other in the aftermath of disaster and built something beautiful from the ruins.